Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, I'd like to tell you about defensive skills. And let's get started right away. Of course, in chess, as much as we would like to only think about our attacking plans or how we're going to win, there are times when it's unavoidable to think about how to save ourselves or how to defend against the opponent's threat and then continue with our own attacks. Well, here is our first example, and this is a position from a real game between Alexander and former world champion Max Euwe. In this position, it's Black's turn. If it wasn't, White would be ready to checkmate in just 2 moves by capturing Black's pawn on h7, followed up by swinging the queen over to f7 or g7. As always throughout a chess game, our first task is to recognize what does our opponent want to do. So in this case, we already know that's what Black is being threatened. So what can we do about it? How can we protect that pawn on h7? Well, protecting the pawn, so to say, by moving it out of the way, doesn't really solve our main problem. That is, that the rook can still go to h7 check, and then the white queen moving over to checkmate our king. So in this position, Black had to find a move that not only defends from the distance with the queen, but of course also furthers Black's plan, that is to promote the far advanced d-pawn. Surprisingly, in this position, White already resigned, although they could have tried to test Black quite a bit more. Let's see what could have happened had White played rook to g4. Now this is a scary looking move because now the white queen is threatening to come to g7 to checkmate. How should Black respond to this? Obviously, Black does not have the time to simply promote the pawn to a queen, because then White would checkmate right away. Also, the most natural looking move, rook g8, that indeed guards the g7 square, wouldn't quite accomplish the desired goal, because now White could trade rooks, followed by a fork, check, and then capturing the pawn on d2. So we have to be careful here in this position after d2 and rook g4 to make sure not only that Black will defend against the checkmate threat, but will maintain his extra pawn, especially that far advanced, very important pawn that's about to get promoted. But how else can Black prevent the checkmate? Here Black has a special move that in fact gives up the queen. It tells you how important it is to avoid getting checkmated, that it's even worth giving up a queen for a rook. The good news is that the Black pawn on d2 is so far advanced and it is being backed by the rook on d8 that there will be a new queen for Black. Now White's best choice is to capture the queen, renewing the checkmate threat on g7. Pawn captures back, and now White can try to create a double attack by queen e7 attacking the rook and the pawn on f6, and after the pawn promotes, which protects the rook on d8, trying to give perpetual checks. Now, it would be a major mistake to move with the king to g8, not only because it loses the pawn on g6, but more importantly, because after this, black would not avoid the eternal checks along the 6th rank. Therefore, in this position, black rather should play king h7, which protects the pawn on g6. Now white can try to give checks in various ways, but after black's correct defense, black escapes in any case. For example, after queen f7, the king would move to h6. After queen f4, the king should move to g7, of course not to h5, which would allow checkmate right away. So the king should move to g7, and after queen e5, king f7, queen f4, and king g8, and white runs out of checks. Again, let's go back to the position after king h7. What if the white queen gives the check from e7? Well then, again the king moves up to h6 and queen h4. Then queen h5 can block the check, and now the white queen is pinned, therefore cannot capture the rook on d8. But how about if the queen gives the check on e3? Then not blocking the check with the pawn, because then after queen e6, indeed black would have no escape from the perpetual checks, but rather moving the king to h5. Luckily now the white queen cannot arrive on h4 like in one of the previous variations. And after queen e5, now already black is ready to block the check by playing g5. It's a good exercise to trying to go back to the starting position, and if you have a friend that you can play out this position against, it's a good idea. It doesn't matter if you didn't memorize the exact moves what black should do. It's more important that you understand the ideas and trying to find them over the board. Even if you look at this position again, maybe a week from now, when you probably will not remember exactly the moves, but hopefully you remember the concept and what was important in trying to hide away from the perpetual checks of the queen. Let's move on to another example that was played with black by another former world champion, Mikhail Botvinnik. His opponent, a very famous grandmaster with the white pieces, was Bogolyubov. In this position, white made a dangerous-looking move, moving the rook up to the 7th rank, attacking two of black's bishops. And again, black needs to look for a defense. Luckily for black, he had at his disposal a counterattack, moving the bishop to g5, attacking white's rook on c1. Therefore, if the rook right now would capture the bishop on b7, black would come out ahead, as after the tricky fork with knight to d3, black is able to protect the bishop right on time. After bishop g5 in the actual game, white moved the rook to the d file, doubling up the rooks. And now the bishop moved away, gaining a tempo, sacrificing the pawn on a7. And now black gets control, very importantly, of the file, offering a trade of rooks and then to occupy it with a second rook. White played a4, maybe not the most ambitious move, and then the rook trade indeed arrived, followed by rook attacking the queen. And after queen c2, white got into major trouble after bishop d2 and in fact resigned. As we can tell, the knight on e1 now has no safe moves. And if white would protect the knight by queen b1, then black would follow with the aggressive e3. And as we can see, the black pieces are beautifully coordinated. The two bishops are very active, so is the black queen and rook. And for example, pawn takes, queen takes, check, king f1, bishop takes, queen takes, and the simplest way to win right now is to sacrifice the bishop and then capture white's queen. Let's move on to our next example, when again it's a matter of defense. In this position, white is up a bishop, which is a major advantage, but black just gave a check with the queen, and also the white king is in a bit delicate position. White has three legal choices in this position, but it's a tough pick. Which one should he choose? Moving the king out of the check to f3 is not the greatest choice, not because black would capture the bishop on b4 when white could still capture black's pawn with a check and be fine, but more because of queen d5 check. How about blocking the check with the rook on e3? In fact, that's the move that white chose mistakenly in the game. Now black captured the pawn, and after queen blocked, black gave another check, and the two sides agreed in a draw. It's quite clear that white has no real escape from the checks without losing the bishop on b4. The only correct move that leads to white's win is blocking the check with the queen. Now, if black would capture the bishop, the simplest way to proceed is capturing the rook on c1, leaving white with an extra rook. But what happens if black instead gives a check with the rook? Well, now white has to be careful. Moving forward with the king would be a major mistake because all of a sudden the white king would be the one getting into trouble. Trouble at the highest degree, checkmate. Therefore, going back to the check with rook c2, the correct move is moving the king to f1. It's important to notice that it wouldn't be quite the same if the king would move instead to g1, because thanks to the pin along the a7 g1 diagonal, black now could give a check again on c1, and white wouldn't have made progress. Would have to repeat moves, and then the correct move is, as I said, moving the king to f1. Now, if black captures the bishop, then again queen captures on e6. Then the black king would need to go towards f8 to avoid a back-rank checkmate on e8, but then white has a well-placed fork on f5 and then capturing the rook. And last but not least, what would happen if after king f1 in this position, black doesn't capture the bishop right away, but plays queen c4? Well, the king would move to g1. If now queen takes bishop, white would continue exactly the same way with queen e6, followed by the fork. And after rook e2, another tricky move, when white has to be real careful not to allow the black queen come down to c1 on the following move. Again, white only has one correct move that saves the game and saves the bishop and will leave white with a winning position. And that move is queen c3. That blocks the black queen's access to the c1 square, also sneakily threatens to checkmate, therefore forces the exchange of queens, which obviously will lead to a won endgame for white having an extra bishop. Let's see the next example. In this position, it's black's turn. We can see that white has tripled up on the d file, attacking the black bishop. Black in this position made a careless combination, responding by knight to e6, allowing white to capture the bishop, and then he thought that now rook d8 will be a tricky move, hoping that after queen takes queen, white would overlook the intermediate check, and then knight takes queen would leave black in a winning position. What black missed was that after knight e6 and rook takes and rook takes and queen takes and rook d8, white can simply defend by playing knight d7, maintaining an extra piece. Luckily for black, in the actual game, after knight e6, white missed this winning opportunity and played g3 when the black bishop had the time to run away. So what should black have played here? Well, the simplest move was to just give a check, and then after king moves out of the check, then play knight e6 with a normal position. The next two examples are from my own practice. I had this position once in a blitz game, and I noticed that my opponent is threatening to trap my queen by playing g5 on the following move, and then, for example, after queen h5, the bishop coming to g4. Of course, I understood that I can move my queen right now to f4 and find safety for my queen. But I thought I have a better move and played knight to d4. And this was a trap that my opponent set up. Unfortunately, this is a losing move. Try to think and figure out what the correct move is right now for black to win material. What I missed was rook captures knight, and that now g5 will leave black with clear material advantage. So what should white do? Knight d4 is definitely not the right move. Queen f4 is okay. But the best choice actually was, while I had the right idea of playing knight d4, I did it in the wrong time. I should have first trade rooks and gain a tempo by putting my second rook on that open file, and only when the queen moves away, play knight d4 now, with quite a nice position. Always look out for tactics of your opponent. The next example in this lesson is a game of mine that I played in a simultaneous exhibition a couple of years ago. In this critical position, Black certainly needs to worry about the weakness of the g7 square and my queen at one point appearing on h6. Try to think, what should Black do in this position? My opponent was a bit greedy and captured this pawn on c3, which was a major mistake. The question is why? There are some amazing tactical situations here. The answer is not queen h6, when Black should simply capture the pawn on f6. It's quite amazing, though, that bishop f8 is not the right move here, even though it seems that now all the white pieces are under attack, the queen, the rook, and the bishop, and obviously white cannot save all of them. Nevertheless, white has a very impressive move here. Bishop capturing c5. And it's not hard to get convinced that Black is lost here. If bishop takes queen, just rook takes rook. If Black captures the bishop on c5, also again the rook is falling. If queen e1, then bishop takes bishop, followed by checkmate on g7. And if Black moves the rook away from the e-file, then again just bishop takes bishop, and there is a problem with the checkmate threat, when Black's best choice is to play queen f6, but white would remain up a bishop. So why was queen c3 a mistake? Is it because of bishop d4? No, because then the queen has time to capture the rook and then just play bishop f8. The correct move after queen c3 was bishop d2, which is what I played. And when my opponent took the bishop, rook takes, and Black resigned, as after bishop f8, queen h6 decides the game. Going back to the starting position again, the question remains, how should Black defend and avoid losing material or getting checkmated? Black has several good moves, the two best ones being either moving the rook to a8, getting out of the e-file, or even rook e6 is playable, putting pressure on the pawn on f6. So defensive skills are just as important as knowing how to attack. In this position, Black is up a pawn, so all Black needs to do is hold off white's devastating looking attack. Then the rest will be easy, because besides the extra pawn, white has additional pawns hanging that are weak and Black can target. And finally, the jewel of the week, a beautiful endgame. Here we are. This position was composed by Eisenegger. The most natural move for white, promoting the pawn to a queen, would fail to succeed to win the game, because after king a1, while white can win many checks, cannot achieve more. The black pawn is about to get promoted, and the only way white can avoid that from happening is by constantly giving checks, but that will only lead to a draw. Let's go back to the starting position and think again. How can white create a win here? Take your time. You may need maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. Try to figure out the solution. It's quite gorgeous. You really enjoy it. And here we go. The least expected move. The bishop moving all the way from one corner to another. Look at that. And allowing the pawn to get promoted. But now, luckily for white, the pawn promotes with a check. Now the king needs to run to c2, otherwise queen b2 would be checkmate. And now the chase starts. The king is being chased all the way to h7. Look at that. King d3, queen c3, king e4, and queen e3. With the help of the c4 pawn, now the king cannot go to d5, only to f5. And the checks just continue and continue and continue until we reach checkmate. Very elegant. I'm very impressed by this endgame. I hope you learned, hope you enjoyed the lesson, and we'll be back next week. Remember, defense is just as important as offense. Not only your own defense, but also when you are attacking. Don't underestimate your opponent's defense. In every move, look out for the best move not only for yourself, but also for your opponent. With that, bye-bye until next week.